My husband and his so-called friends abandoned me at a lonely roadside diner as part of their cruel joke, but instead of breaking me, their betrayal set me free, and I built a new life filled with love, family, and power. You know that feeling when something is wrong, but you can't identify what? That was exactly what I felt while David packed his backpack for another one of his sacred trips with his high school friends, a 4-day fishing trip in the Montana countryside, away from everything and everyone. This time, for the first time in 4 years of marriage, he invited me to come along. "It'll be fun, honey," he said, avoiding my gaze while folding his shirts. "The guys love you." That was a lie. Connor, Blake, and Trevor tolerated me at best. When we were all together, I felt like an intruder in an exclusive club I would never be part of. They had their inside jokes and shared references from decades of friendship, and I was just David's wife, who had shown up to ruin the fun. But I wanted so badly to believe things could be different, that maybe they would finally accept me as part of the group, that David would defend me when they made sarcastic comments disguised as jokes. The trip started as I expected. In the car, sitting in the back seat while Connor drove, I listened to their conversations about work, sports, and good old times that always excluded any mention of wives or girlfriends. When I tried to participate, Blake would roll his eyes and change the subject. When I commented on the scenery, Trevor would sigh audibly. "Mara, you're pretty quiet back there," Connor said, looking at me through the rearview mirror with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're not carsick, are you?" "I'm fine," I lied, clasping my hands in my lap. "Oh, it's just that you look a bit pale. Maybe you shouldn't drink too much when we get there. You know how you get when you drink." I had never drunk too much in front of them. I didn't even drink much in general, but that was the dynamic. They created a version of me that justified their disdain, and David never defended me. Never. "She's fine," David said without much conviction. "Leave Mara alone." "Relax, man. I'm just worried about your wife," Connor replied. And they all laughed with that masculine laugh I had learned to hate. The cabin was on an isolated property, surrounded by mountains and trees. It was beautiful but completely disconnected from the world, no cell phone signal, no internet, just the 5 of us in nature. It should have been romantic, but I felt like a prisoner. During the next 3 days, the situation only got worse. They fished during the day while I stayed at the cabin, reading or trying to keep myself busy. When they returned, it was as if I were invisible. They drank beer, played cards, and told stories about people I didn't know. "Remember when we went to that bar in Missoula, and you almost fought that big guy?" Blake asked Trevor on the second night. "Man, I was so drunk I barely remember," Trevor replied, laughing. "But David held me back before I did something stupid." "You were always the most sensible one in the group," Connor said, patting David on the shoulder. "Except when choosing who to marry." Silence. I felt my face burn as I waited for David to defend me, to say something, anything. But he just laughed nervously and changed the subject. "Anyone want more beer?" At that moment, I knew, not just that they hated me, but that David was embarrassed of me. His own wife was a joke among his friends, and he allowed it. On the third night, while they played poker, I went out to the porch and cried silently. The sky was clear, full of stars I never saw in the city. For a moment, I wondered if it would be easier to simply disappear right there, to walk into the forest and never come back. "Hey, are you okay?" It was David, standing in the porch doorway with a beer in his hand. His eyes were glazed, but there was a trace of genuine concern. "I'm tired," I said quickly, wiping away the tears. "I think I'll go to sleep." "Want me to come with you?" For a second, I thought he really cared, that maybe he recognized how his friends treated me and wanted to comfort me. "You don't need to. I know you're having fun with your friends. They're good guys, Mara. You just need to get to know them better." Get to know them better? The anger I had swallowed for 3 days finally escaped. "David, they treat me like garbage. And you sit there laughing along. You're exaggerating. It's just their way. They tease everyone." "Tease? Was that teasing when Connor said you should have thought better before marrying me?" David looked away, unable to face me. He was drunk. "And you? Were you drunk when you laughed?" "Mara, please, let's not fight here." "Of course. Let's not fight here. Let's not ruin the boys' fun. Let's not make David have to choose between his wife and his precious friends." "You're right," I said, standing up. "Let's not fight." I went into the cabin and to the bedroom, where I pretended to sleep until I felt David lie down beside me hours later. He smelled of beer and cigarettes and whispered a drunken, "I love you," in my ear before passing out. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and wondering how I had gotten to this point. 4 years of marriage, and I felt lonelier than when I was single. On the last day, we decided to return home. I was anxious to get out of there, to return to my normal life where I could at least pretend everything was fine. We packed quickly, and soon we were on the road back. The return trip was even more tense. They seemed to be plotting something, whispers, glances, muffled giggles. I tried not to be paranoid, but the feeling that something was wrong only grew. "Guys, I'm hungry," Connor said after a few hours on the road. "Let's stop at that place we always stop at." "Good idea," Blake agreed. Mara, do you know Betty's Diner? Serves the best apple pie in Montana. It was the first time one of them had spoken directly to me in 4 days. It should have been a relief, but something in his tone made me even more uncomfortable. No, I replied. I've never stopped there. You'll love it, Trevor said. And they all laughed with that laugh I had learned to fear. The diner was in the middle of nowhere, an old wooden building with some pickup trucks parked outside, the kind of place frequented by truckers and locals. Honestly, it looked exactly like the kind of place they would frequent. We went in and sat at a table in the back. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a stained apron, came to take our order. They ordered burgers and beer, I just ordered coffee and toast. Aren't you going to eat something more substantial? Connor asked with false concern. You're too thin. I'm fine, thank you. She always eats like a bird, David said, and everyone laughed. Sometimes I wonder how she has energy for anything. The comment was loaded with innuendo, and I felt my face burn with shame. They were discussing our intimate life as if I weren't there, as if I were an object, not a person. I need to go to the bathroom, I said, getting up abruptly. Sure, Connor said with that cruel smile. We're not going anywhere. The bathroom was small and dirty, with a fluorescent light that flickered. I leaned against the sink and took a deep breath, trying to control the anger and humiliation. Just a few more hours, I told myself. Just a few more hours, and I'd be home, away from them. When I returned to the diner area, the table was empty. Initially, I thought maybe they had gone to pay the bill or smoke outside. I looked around, searching for them. The waitress saw me standing there, confused. Your friends left, she said, not looking up from the counter she was cleaning. Left? I couldn't process what I was hearing. Where did they go? Ran out to the car, laughing like teenagers. Left money on the table for the bill. I ran to the door and looked at the parking lot. It was empty, no sign of the car or the men I had come with. My heart started racing as reality set in. They'll come back, I said out loud, more to convince myself than to inform anyone. It's just a stupid joke. They'll come back. The waitress looked at me with pity. Honey, they took all your things. I saw them throw a backpack in the trunk before leaving. My backpack, with my phone, wallet, documents, everything. I sat heavily in a chair by the window and looked at the empty road. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a reddish orange that should have been beautiful but felt threatening. It's a joke, I repeated, my voice trembling. They'll come back. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. The whispers, glances, and giggles all made sense now. They had planned this. My own husband had planned to abandon me at a diner in the middle of Montana as if it were the funniest thing in the world. The waitress approached with a cup of coffee. On the house, she said gently. You look like you need it. Thank you, I murmured, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. How long ago did they leave? About 20 minutes. 20 minutes, enough time for them to get far away, but not enough for me to fully accept that this was happening. Part of me still believed David would come back, that he would realize the joke had gone too far. But hours passed, and they didn't return. The sun set completely, and the diner began to empty. I sat there, alternating between anger, despair, and a strange sense of peace I couldn't explain. Honey, the waitress said as she started cleaning the other tables, do you have someone who can come pick you up? I shook my head. My parents lived on the other side of the country, and I didn't have close enough friends to ask for that kind of favor. David had been my world for the past few years, and now that world had disappeared. There's a shelter in Billings, she continued. For women in difficult situations. It's not far from here. I can call them. No, I said quickly. I don't need to. They'll come back. But as I spoke, I looked at the empty parking lot again and knew I was lying to myself. They weren't coming back. This wasn't a joke that had gone too far, it was abandonment, pure and simple. For the first time in 4 years, I was completely alone. And the scariest part was that, amid the panic and humiliation, a small voice in my head whispered something I didn't want to admit. I felt free. I slept little that night. The waitress, whose name was Dorothy, let me stay in the diner until closing and gave me an old blanket to cover myself. I spent the early morning awake, sitting in that plastic chair, processing not just what had happened that day, but all the days that led up to it. How had I not noticed? The signs were all there, Connor spilling beer on my blouse accidentally on the first night, Blake whispering in David's ear while looking at me and laughing, Trevor making comments about how I didn't let David be a real man. They had tested me, humiliated me, prepared me for this final moment. And David, my husband of 4 years, had not just allowed it but actively participated in the conspiracy to abandon me like I was trash. When the sun began to rise, painting the Montana sky with shades of pink and gold, I felt different, not better, not worse, just different. As if one version of me had died in that diner and another was being born. Dorothy arrived at 6 in the morning to open the diner, found me awake, and offered me breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, real food that I devoured, realizing I had eaten practically nothing the day before. Honey, she said gently while I ate, you need help getting out of here. Are you sure you don't want me to call someone? I don't have anyone, I finally admitted. My parents live in Florida, and I I don't have close enough friends. What about your husband? I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh without humor. My husband was the one who abandoned me here. Dorothy's eyes filled with understanding and anger. What a son of a bitch, she muttered. Sorry for the language, but what kind of man does that? The kind who marries me, I replied. And for the first time, I managed to laugh for real. That's when an elderly couple entered the diner. He was tall and thin, with white hair and big hands of someone who had worked his whole life. She was small and round, with kind eyes and a warm smile. They looked like they had stepped out of a movie about perfect grandparents. Hello, Dorothy, the woman said. The usual, please. Sure, Margaret, Harold, how are things at the farm? While they talked, I watched them. There was something about the way they treated each other, the ease of their interaction, that made me feel a pang of envy. They had clearly been together for decades and still looked at each other with genuine affection. Are you from around here? Margaret asked, turning to me. No, I replied. I'm just passing through, alone. Alone? Harold asked, with genuine concern in his voice. Dorothy approached. Margaret, Harold, this is. Sorry, honey, I don't even know your name. Mara, I said. Mara Coleman. Mara had some transportation problems, Dorothy explained diplomatically. She needs to get somewhere with more resources. Margaret and Harold exchanged a look, a silent communication that only decades of marriage could foster. Where are you headed? Margaret asked. I don't know, I admitted. I need a place with a hospital, library, places where I can work. Billings, Harold said immediately. It's the closest city with all that. About 2 hours from here. We're going to Billings today, Margaret added. We have a doctor's appointment. You can come with us if you want. I looked at them, these kind strangers offering help to a woman they didn't even know. Then I looked at Dorothy, who nodded encouragingly. I don't have money for gas, I said honestly. We didn't ask for any, Harold replied simply. Just get your things. My things. I laughed internally. I didn't have things, just the clothes on my body and a borrowed blanket. Ready, I said. The trip to Billings was revealing. Margaret and Harold, who introduced themselves as the Thompsons, were kind without being invasive. They didn't ask questions about my situation, just told me about their farm, their grandchildren, and life in Montana. Do you have family in Billings? Margaret eventually asked. No, I admitted. Actually, I don't have family anywhere. Not close, at least. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the one we're born into, Harold observed, looking at me through the rearview mirror. As the Montana mountains passed by the window, I allowed myself to fully process what had happened. David hadn't just abandoned me, he had humiliated me, betrayed me, treated me like a disposable object. For years of marriage, reduced to a cruel joke among friends. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something surprising. I wasn't devastated. I was angry, yes, hurt, certainly, but not devastated. And that realization scared me more than the abandonment itself. You know, I said out loud, surprising myself, I think my marriage was already dead for a long time. I just hadn't realized it. Sometimes we need a shock to see what's right in front of us, Margaret said gently. They did you a favor, Harold added pragmatically. Men like that don't deserve women like you. Like you. He didn't even know me, but there was something about the way he said it that made me believe he was right. We arrived in Billings in the late afternoon. It was a medium-sized city with buildings of a few stories and constant movement. It seemed civilized, functional, like a place where a person could start over. Where would you like us to drop you off? Harold asked. Do you know any place where women in difficult situations can stay temporarily? Margaret nodded. There's a shelter run by a woman named Ruth. She's intense, but good. Very good. Intense how? I asked. Ex-military, Harold explained. Doesn't accept excuses, but doesn't judge either. If you're willing to work, she'll help you. They dropped me off in front of a simple building with a small sign, New Beginnings Women's Shelter. Before I got out of the car, Margaret gave me an envelope. Don't open it now, she said. But when you need a little push, remember that some people still believe in kindness. I thanked them, not knowing how to adequately express my gratitude. They had saved me, literally and figuratively. The shelter was clean but Spartan. The woman at the reception directed me to a small room where I waited for Ruth. When she appeared, I immediately understood what Margaret meant by intense. Ruth was tall and thin, with short graying hair and eyes that seemed to see through people. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt but had a posture that screamed military authority. Mara Coleman, she said, consulting a clipboard. Dorothy called earlier, said you were abandoned by your husband. Yes, I replied simply. Got somewhere to go? No. Got money? No. Got skills? I worked in an office before getting married. Organization, customer service, basic things. Ruth studied me for a long moment. Do you want to be a victim, or do you want to work? The question caught me off guard. Work. Good. Rules are simple: no alcohol, no drugs, no men on the premises. You clean up after yourself, contribute to household chores, and actively look for work. You can stay until you find something stable. Thank you, I said, genuinely grateful. Don't thank me yet, Ruth replied dryly. Thank me when you leave here with a job and your own place. She showed me a small room with a simple bed, a dresser, and a window facing the street. It was basic, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that was just mine. That night, alone in my new room, I opened the envelope Margaret had given me. Inside were $50 and a note, for the brave woman who chose to start over. M&H. I cried then, not for the first time since the abandonment, but in a different way. These weren't tears of self-pity, but of something like hope. The next morning, Ruth woke me at 7 sharp. Public library is looking for someone for cleaning. Minimum wage, but it's a start. Interested? Yes, I replied without hesitation. Let's go, then. They don't like to wait. The Billings Library was a 2-story brick building with large windows and a welcoming atmosphere. The human resources manager, a gentleman named Mike, interviewed me quickly. It's not glamorous, he explained. Cleaning bathrooms, vacuuming carpets, organizing returned books, but it's honest work. Honest is all I want, I replied. He smiled. You start Monday. I left the library feeling lighter than I had in months. I had a job, a place to live, and, for the first time in years, a sense of purpose. Ruth was waiting at the shelter's reception when I returned. Did you get it? I got it. Good. Now, let's take care of your documentation. You need new cards, bank account, the basic things. We spent the rest of the day dealing with bureaucracy. Ruth guided me through the process of replacing my lost documents, opening a new bank account, and even gave me donated clothes that would work for the job. Why are you doing this? I asked as we walked back to the shelter. Because someone did it for me once, she replied simply. And because you have fire in your eyes. Women like you don't stay down for long. That night, I lay in my simple bed and looked at the ceiling. It had only been 2 days since David and his friends had abandoned me, but it felt like a lifetime. I was still angry, still hurt, but underneath all that, something new was growing: strength, determination, the realization that I was more resilient than I had imagined. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. My first week at the library was simultaneously humiliating and liberating. Humiliating because I was cleaning bathrooms with a college degree, liberating because every penny I earned was mine, earned with my own sweat without depending on anyone. Mike gave me a complete tour on the first day. You'll start with basic cleaning, he explained. But if you're interested, there are opportunities to grow here. We always need people to help with community programs, event organization, things like that. I absorbed every word. After 4 years of being treated as incompetent by David's friends, being seen as someone with potential was almost too exciting to process. The work itself was simple but satisfying: vacuuming carpets, cleaning surfaces, organizing returned books. I started at 7 in the morning and finished at 3 in the afternoon, earning $8 an hour. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first weeks were physically difficult. My hands, used to office work, became rough from cleaning products. My back ached from constant effort. But there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the tangible results of my work: clean bathrooms, shiny floors, organized books. Ruth helped me with the paperwork to recover my documents. Bureaucracy is a pain, she said pragmatically while helping me fill out forms, but it's necessary. You can't rebuild a life without a legal identity. The process took weeks: birth certificate, driver's license, divorce papers. I still didn't have the courage to file for divorce. Each form filled out was like a brick in the foundation of my new life. With my first paycheck, I bought a basic cell phone at a convenience store. It was nothing compared to the smartphone David had given me, but when I turned it on and heard the dial tone, I felt disproportionately proud. That simple phone, paid for with my own money, represented independence in a way I had never experienced. I also recovered my old number, a decision I would question later, but at that moment, it seemed important to maintain some continuity with my previous life. The library became my sanctuary. During breaks, I sat among the shelves and read, rediscovering the pleasure of getting lost in stories and knowledge. There was something poetic about working in a place dedicated to learning and growth. You read a lot, Mike observed one day, finding me in the history section during my lunch break. I always read, I replied. But in recent years, I guess I forgot how good it was. Your husband didn't like you reading? The question caught me off guard. Not that he didn't like it, but he always had something more important to do: going out with friends, watching sports, things like that. I kind of adapted to his priorities. Mike nodded with understanding. My ex-wife was like that. Always wanted me to be different from what I was. We divorced 3 years ago, and it was the best decision I ever made. Don't you miss it? I miss the idea of being married, he admitted. But I don't miss feeling inadequate in my own home. His words stayed with me for the rest of the day. I hadn't realized until then, but that was exactly how I felt with David: inadequate in my own life. Weeks passed, and I settled into a routine: wake up at 6, breakfast at the shelter, work at the library, simple dinner, reading before bed. It was a simple life, but it was mine. Ruth began giving me more responsibilities at the shelter. You have a way with the other women, she observed. They trust you. It was true. Women came to the shelter at different stages of despair, some fleeing abusive relationships, others simply having nowhere to go. I found myself offering words of encouragement, helping with paperwork, or simply listening when they needed to talk. You should consider social work, one of the women, Sandra, told me one day. You have a gift for it. I don't have training, I replied. You can get training. A gift is harder to come by. That's when my phone rang for the first time since I had recovered my number. It was a number I recognized but hoped never to see again, David. My heart raced as I looked at the screen. Part of me, a small but persistent part, wanted to answer, to hear his voice, to hear him say it had all been a terrible mistake. But I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail and listened to the message with trembling hands. Mara, it's me. Where are you? We waited for you at the diner. It was just a joke, you know. Connor thought it would be funny, but then we realized it went too far. Call us, okay? I'm worried. I listened to the message 3 times before deleting it. Every word confirmed everything I had realized about our relationship. Even in his attempt to apologize, he was throwing the blame on Connor, minimizing what had happened as just a joke. There was no real acknowledgement of what he had done, no understanding of how it had affected me, just a superficial attempt to return to the status quo. More calls came. Connor, with his arrogant voice, come on, Mara. You have to admit it was funny. You were always so serious. Call us, okay? David is being a pain about this. Blake, trying to sound charming, Mara, honey, where are you? We're starting to get worried. You know we didn't mean to hurt you, right? It was just a joke between friends. Trevor, clearly drunk, Mara, damn it. Stop with this drama. You're fine, aren't you? Of course you are. You were always tough. Call us before David has a nervous breakdown. Each message made me angrier, not just because of the insensitivity, but because of the presumption that I would come running back, that I would accept their pathetic apologies and pretend nothing had happened. Sitting in my small room at the shelter, I listened to all the messages one by one. Then, in a moment of crystal clarity, I blocked all their numbers. Done, I said out loud to the empty room. It's over. And for the first time since the abandonment, I felt truly free. The following months were of constant growth. Mike promoted me from cleaning to community programs assistant, a position that paid $2 more per hour and gave me the chance to interact with the public. You have natural talent for this, he said on the day of the promotion. People feel comfortable with you. My new job involved helping organize events at the library, assisting people with basic research, and coordinating reading programs for children. It was work that energized me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. With the salary increase, I rented a small studio above a coffee shop in downtown Billings. It was tiny, just one room with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had my own space. Ruth helped me move. You did this fast, she observed as we carried my few possessions upstairs. Did what? Rebuilt your life. Most women who go through the shelter take much longer to get established. Maybe I was ready for change longer than I realized, I replied. Or maybe you're stronger than you thought. My small apartment was Spartan, a mattress on the floor, 2 folding chairs, a kitchenette with the basics. But when I closed the door that first night, alone in my own space, I felt a deep satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. I established a new routine: wake up early, walk to the library, work with renewed energy, come home, and cook simple dinners in my tiny kitchenette. Some nights I read, others, I sat by the window watching life pass by on the street. It was a simple life, but it was genuinely mine. It was during one of these quiet nights that I met my downstairs neighbor, a woman named Elena who ran the coffee shop. She came up one day with a cup of coffee and a warm smile. You must be the new tenant, she said. I'm Elena. Welcome to the building. Mara, I replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. Thank you for this. How are you adjusting? Well, I said, and realized it was true. Very well, actually. Elena smiled. Sometimes change is exactly what we need, even when we don't ask for it. Her words stayed with me. I hadn't asked to be abandoned on the road, but maybe it was exactly what I needed to force myself to create the life I really wanted. Weeks turned into months, and my life gained a comfortable rhythm: work at the library, a simple but mine home, genuine relationships with people who respected me. That's when a new person entered my life, someone who would change everything once again. A young doctor named Carmen began frequenting the library regularly, always asking for the same corner table, always ordering coffee from the machine, and always researching intensely. Initially, I watched her from afar. There was something about her total concentration, the way she took meticulous notes, how she rubbed her temples when tired, that intrigued me. After a few weeks, I began making small gestures, secretly reserving her favorite table, leaving interesting pediatric articles from medical journals, discreetly replacing old coffee with fresh when she wasn't looking. One day, she caught me in the act. You've been doing this, haven't you? She asked with a half smile that made my heart skip. Doing what? I asked, feigning innocence. Reserving my table, leaving these articles, keeping the coffee fresh. My face turned red. I noticed you always sit here and thought it would be nice. And it is very nice, she said. Carmen had dark, intelligent eyes, black hair always pulled back in a practical bun, and a way of speaking that was both professional and warm. She was a pediatrician at the local hospital, doing residency and working brutal shifts. You work a lot, I observed one day when she appeared visibly exhausted. Medical residency, she explained. Some days feel like they last 48 hours. The next day, I left a cup of chamomile tea on her table with a note, to help you relax. When she found it, she looked for me at reception. You're thoughtful, she said simply. It's to help you relax, I replied, feeling strangely nervous. It works, she said, smiling. Thank you. These small exchanges became more frequent. Carmen began stopping by reception when she arrived and left, always with a smile and a few kind words. I began eagerly anticipating these interactions, realizing they were the highlight of my days. One Friday afternoon, Carmen appeared at the library looking particularly stressed. Hard day? I asked. Lost 3 patients this week, she said, her voice heavy. I know it's part of the job, but some weeks are harder than others. I'm sorry, I said, feeling a genuine urge to comfort her. Do you want to talk about it? She looked at me for a long moment. You know, I think I would, but not here. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? My heart raced. I would love to. Great. I know a small Italian place. Nothing fancy, but the food is good. We spent the afternoon exchanging nervous glances and smiles. When I finished work, I ran home to change, carefully choosing a simple dress that Elena had helped me buy. The restaurant was small and cozy, with candles on the tables and an atmosphere that invited intimate conversations. Carmen was already there when I arrived, and when she saw me, her face lit up. You look beautiful, she said, standing up to greet me. Thank you, I replied, feeling simultaneously nervous and excited. Dinner was perfect, there was no other word to describe it. We talked about everything, work, life, dreams, fears. Carmen told me about the challenges of medicine, her desire to help children, and the constant pressure of saving lives. And you, she asked, how did you end up in Billings? You don't seem like you're from here. I hesitated. The story of my abandonment wasn't exactly first date conversation. Life change, I said vaguely. Sometimes we need to start over. I understand, she said. And I realized she really did understand. Sometimes what seems like the end is actually the beginning. We ordered wine, and the conversation became more relaxed. Carmen made me laugh with hospital stories, and I found myself talking about my work at the library, about discovering that I liked helping people. You're observant, she said, her eyes shining in the candlelight. It must be a gift. How so? The way you notice what people need, the coffee, the tea, the articles. You really see people. No one had ever described me that way. With David, I always felt invisible, irrelevant. But Carmen made me feel seen, valued. You make me feel interesting, I admitted. You are interesting, she replied simply. Very interesting. We finished dinner reluctantly, neither wanting the night to end. Carmen insisted on driving me home, and we sat talking in the car in front of my building for another hour. Can I see you again? She asked when it was time to say goodbye. I would love that, I replied. She leaned over and kissed me softly on the cheek. Good night, Mara. Good night, Carmen. I went up the stairs, floating. There was something about Carmen that made me feel like parts of me I had forgotten existed were awakening. She saw me as a complete, interesting, valuable person, completely different from anything I had experienced with David. That night, lying in my bed, I allowed myself to imagine possibilities. For the first time since the abandonment, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to thrive. The next months were of gradual discovery. Carmen and I began meeting regularly, dinners, walks, afternoons at the library when she wasn't working. She introduced me to a world I didn't know, local theater, live music, deep conversations about art and literature. You've never been to a concert? She asked, incredulous, when I mentioned I had never watched live music. David didn't like music, I explained. He said it was a waste of time and money. Well, Carmen said, taking my hand, let's remedy that. She took me to a small cafe that had live music on Thursdays. A local singer performed acoustic versions of classics, and I found myself completely absorbed by the experience. When the music stopped, I realized I was crying. Are you okay? Carmen asked, worried. I am, I said, wiping away the tears. I just forgot what it was like to feel something like this. Carmen understood me in a way I had never experienced. She didn't judge my emotional reactions or make me feel excessive or dramatic. She simply accepted who I was. Our relationship evolved naturally. The first kiss happened after a long dinner when we were talking in the car in front of my apartment. The conversation had flowed from medicine to books, from books to dreams, from dreams to fears. I'm afraid I'm getting too attached, I admitted. My last relationship didn't end well. Do you want to talk about it? I told her everything, the marriage to David, the cruel friends, the abandonment, rebuilding my life. Carmen listened without interrupting, just holding my hand. What bastards, she said when I finished. Sorry for the language, but what kind of person does that? The kind I thought I loved, I replied. You deserve much better, she said intensely. You deserve someone who sees you for what you really are. And what am I really? Strong, intelligent, kind, resilient. She paused. Beautiful. That's when she kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then with more intensity when I responded. It was completely different from kissing David. There was no rush, no sense of obligation, just genuine connection. Wow, I said when we separated. Carmen laughed. Is wow good? Wow is very good. Our relationship deepened gradually. Carmen was patient with my insecurities, understanding about my past, and encouraging about my future. When I doubted myself, she simply said, "You can do it." And for some reason, I believed her. 6 months after our first date, Carmen suggested she move into my apartment. It's tiny, I warned. There's no room for 2 people. Then we'll find a bigger place, she said pragmatically. Together. The idea of living with someone again scared me, but the idea of living with Carmen excited me. We found a 1-bedroom apartment with a real kitchen and actual living room. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. Living with Carmen was a revelation. She didn't mock my habits, didn't make me feel small, didn't exclude me from conversations. When I cooked, she genuinely praised it. When I chose a movie, she watched with real interest. When I talked about my work, she listened as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. You make me feel interesting, I told her one night while we cooked dinner together. You are interesting, she replied, as if it were obvious. Why do you think you're not? David always made me feel ordinary, boring. David was an idiot, Carmen said firmly, and clearly blind. We lived together for a year before I received an offer that would change everything again. Ruth had observed my growth at the library with interest. One day, she appeared during my shift with a surprising proposal. The library is expanding, she explained. They want to create a community literacy program with its own budget. They need someone to run it. And you're telling me this because I recommended you. I stopped organizing books and looked at her. Me, Ruth? I've been cleaning bathrooms for 2 years. You work hard, genuinely care about people, have vision, she said pragmatically. Mike agrees. The question is, do you want it? The offer was for community literacy program coordinator, own budget, own office, salary almost doubled. It was an opportunity to make a real difference in the community. I don't know if I'm qualified, I admitted. Qualifications you can learn. Character you already have. That night, I told Carmen about the offer. She was cooking while I talked. When I finished, she turned to me with a wooden spoon in her hand. And you're thinking of turning it down? She asked. I don't know if I can do this. Carmen put the spoon aside and took my hands firmly. Mara, you're already coordinating half the library's programs without the official title. You organize events, help families, connect people with resources. You just need to make it official. What if I fail? What if you don't fail? She countered. What if you're exactly what this program needs? Her words echoed in my head for days. Finally, I went to Mike's office and accepted the offer. Excellent, he said, smiling broadly. You start next Monday. My new program was small at first, a borrowed room, some donated computers, and a handful of volunteers. But it was mine to nurture, and I was determined to make it work. The first months were chaotic, volunteers quit, I struggled with public administration bureaucracy, and some families were skeptical about the program. There were moments when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. But gradually, things fell into place. I learned to navigate institutional politics, found committed volunteers, and began to see real results. Adults who had never learned to read properly could now help their children with homework. Immigrant families gained confidence with English. Elderly people discovered the joy of reading books they had always wanted. You're flourishing, Carmen observed one night, finding me at home energized after a productive day. It's strange, I said. For years, I felt like I wasn't good at anything, but this I can do. You were always good at this, she corrected. You just needed the right opportunity. A year later, my program had tripled in size. We had our own room, an expanded budget, and a waiting list for classes. I had found my calling. It was also when Carmen and I decided to get married. The proposal happened in typical Carmen fashion, practical and direct. We were in the kitchen making breakfast when she said, I think we should get married. Just like that, out of nowhere? I asked, laughing. It's not out of nowhere. I've been thinking about it for months. I love you. You love me. We live together. We have plans for the future. Marriage is the logical next step. That was extremely romantic, I teased. Do you prefer grand gestures? I can kneel if you want. No, I said, kissing her. I prefer honesty. And yes, I want to marry you. We married in a small ceremony in the library garden, with Ruth as my maid of honor and Elena as our unofficial photographer. It was simple, intimate, and perfect. 2 years later, we decided to adopt. The process was long and emotional, but eventually, we were connected with 2 siblings, Sophia, 7 years old, and Miguel, 5. They had been in the system for almost 2 years after their parents died in a car accident. Are you sure? The social worker asked. 2 children at once is a big adjustment. Carmen and I looked at each other. They're siblings, I said. We don't want to separate them. The transition wasn't easy. Sophia was cautious and protective of Miguel, who had frequent nightmares. But gradually, they began to trust us. Sophia discovered a love for books, spending hours at the library where I worked. Miguel revealed himself to be a natural artist, covering our refrigerator with drawings. You're a real family now, Ruth observed one day, watching the children play while Carmen and I talked. We always were, I replied. It just took time for everyone to realize it. Life was good, better than good, it was complete. My literacy program was respected in the community. Carmen had finished her residency and established herself as a pediatrician. The children were thriving in school. I had built a life that was genuinely mine, surrounded by people who loved and respected me. That's when the past decided to find me. It started with emails. I had a professional address for the literacy program listed on the library website. One morning, I found a message from David in my inbox. Mara, it's me. Found out where you're working. Impressive what you've done with your life. Can we talk? I have important things to tell you. I deleted it without responding. More emails came, David trying to sound casual, then worried, then desperate. He mentioned my mother, who had died 2 years earlier, tried to make me feel guilty for disappearing, and talked about miscommunication and second chances. I deleted them all without reading them completely. Who is David Coleman? Carmen asked one day, passing by while I checked emails. Nobody important, I replied quickly, closing the laptop. Carmen gave me a questioning look but didn't insist. She had learned to recognize when I needed space. The email stopped after a few weeks, and I thought it was over. Then I realized someone had viewed my LinkedIn profile repeatedly, 23 times in the last month, all from the same account, David Coleman. He was actively looking for me, investigating my life. The realization gave me chills. Are you okay? Carmen asked the next morning, finding me in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, drinking coffee and looking out the window. Just couldn't sleep, I lied. Mara, she said gently, sitting beside me, you know you can tell me anything, right? I wanted to tell her, to share the burden of this growing anxiety. But I didn't want to bring David into our happy life, not even for a moment. I know, I said, kissing her forehead. I'm fine. Just work. But I wasn't fine. The feeling of being watched, investigated, hunted was making me paranoid. I found myself looking over my shoulder, checking locks twice, wondering if every tall man I saw on the street could be David. Carmen noticed my growing tension but respected my space. The children, fortunately, were too busy with school and friends to notice my unease. 3 months passed without incidents. I began to relax, thinking maybe David had given up and moved on. That's when they showed up. It was a Tuesday morning, typical. I was in my office reviewing proposals to expand the literacy program when Mike knocked on my door. Mara, there are some men here asking for you. They say they're old friends. My blood froze. Men? 3 of them? One said his name is David. 12 years. 12 years since they had abandoned me at that diner like I was trash. 12 years of rebuilding, growth, discovering who I really was. And now they simply showed up as if nothing had happened. Where are they? I asked, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. In the reception area. I took a deep breath. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Mike nodded and left. I sat in my chair for a moment, processing. They had found me. After all these years, all these changes, all this growth, they had tracked me down. But I was no longer the woman they had abandoned. I was no longer the insecure wife who accepted humiliation and silence. I was Mara Coleman, Community Literacy Program Coordinator, wife, mother, a woman who had built a meaningful life from scratch. They wanted to talk to me? Perfect. I had some things to say, too. I opened my desk drawer, took out my checkbook, wrote a check quickly, put it in an envelope, and headed to reception. David was there, older, grayer, but still recognizable. Connor and Blake were with him, all looking uncomfortable and out of place in the library. Trevor, I noticed, wasn't there. When they saw me, their expressions showed obvious shock. I was no longer the broken woman they remembered. I was wearing a professional suit, carried myself with confidence, and clearly belonged in this place. Mara, David said, trying to smile. You look good. I am good, I replied coldly. What do you want? The 3 exchanged nervous glances. Clearly, they had expected to find the same vulnerable woman they had abandoned. Look, Connor began, we know things ended badly between us. Ended badly? I interrupted. You abandoned me at a diner in the middle of Montana without money, phone, or transportation. That didn't end badly. That was deliberate cruelty. It was a joke that got out of control, Blake said quickly. We didn't think, no, I said firmly. You thought very carefully. You planned it. And now, 12 years later, you show up here. Why? David stepped forward. Mara, we need help. Connor lost his job. Blake is getting divorced and needs money for lawyers. And Trevor. Trevor has drinking problems and needs rehabilitation. I studied them for a long moment, middle-aged men, clearly desperate, coming to ask me for help. The irony was almost comical. And you thought I would help you because you were always good, David said, trying to sound sincere. You always cared about people, and we are people who deserve you to care. Embarrassing silence. I took the envelope from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. Open it. David picked up the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a check for exactly $89.75. What is this? Connor asked. That's what a bus ticket from Billings home would have cost me 12 years ago, I explained calmly. When you abandoned me there, that would have been my only option to get back. Mara, I didn't go back, I continued. Instead, I built a life here, a good life, with people who respect me, love me, value me. I have a wonderful wife, 2 incredible children, and work that gives me purpose. The 3 men fell silent, clearly uncomfortable. That check, I said, pointing to the paper in David's hand, represents the only thing I owe you, the cost of bringing me back to a life you helped me realize I hated. Mara, please, you have no right to anything more, I said firmly. Not to my sympathy, not to my forgiveness, and certainly not to my financial help. David folded the check and looked at me with eyes beginning to fill with tears. I'm sorry, he said, for what we did, for what I did. You didn't deserve that. No, I agreed. I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful it happened because it forced me to discover who I really am. I picked up my purse and headed for the exit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a life to live. A good life, built without you. I left the library and walked home, where Carmen was making dinner and the children were doing homework at the kitchen table, my family, my real life. How was work? Carmen asked, kissing me when I entered. Interesting, I replied, hugging her. But now it's over. That night, after we put the children to bed, I told Carmen about David and the others, about the confrontation at the library, about the check. $89.75, she repeated, impressed. You remembered the exact amount. I calculated it when I first got here, I admitted. Part of me always knew this day would come. And how do you feel? I thought about it. At peace, I said finally. Completely at peace. Carmen smiled. Good. They don't deserve even a second of your thoughts. They don't deserve it, I agreed. And they won't get it. I never saw David, Connor, or Blake again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that David moved to another state, that Connor eventually found work, that Blake lost half his assets in the divorce. Trevor, I learned later, died from alcohol-related complications 2 years after our encounter. But that information reached me like distant echoes from a life that was no longer mine. My real life was here in Billings, with Carmen and the children, with my work and the community I had helped build. Sophia is now in college, studying to be a teacher. Miguel is in high school, considering art or architecture. Carmen became head of pediatrics at the local hospital. My literacy program expanded to 3 different locations throughout the city. Sometimes, when I'm driving on the road leading out of Billings, I pass the exit to that diner where it all began. I always smile when I see the sign, not from nostalgia or sentimentality, but from gratitude. Because it was there, abandoned and humiliated, that I found my strength. It was there that my real life began. David and his friends thought they were punishing me when they abandoned me, but actually, they freed me. They freed me from a small life, from toxic relationships, from settling for less than I deserved. They gave me the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover who I really am when no one is telling me who I should be. And for that, paradoxically, I am grateful, not to them, but for the journey that began on that terrible day on the Montana road.